Hello and welcome to the Audiobook Club. In this week's episode, I'm thrilled to be joined with the wonderful audiobook narrator, singer and actor Anne-Marie Lewis. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for joining me on the show. How are you today?
I'm fine, and I'm so glad to meet you, John.
It's really nice to meet you too. Now, if we may, I'd love to start right at the very beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got started in the world of performance and, of course, audiobooks?
Well, the world of performance, I was always a ham of a child. So I would always be performing in front of my family. Just not, I had no qualms about getting up and singing and dancing. I wanted to be an actress. I really had that in mind when I went to college. But I ended up studying a program called the Program of Liberal Studies, which is a great books program. And I would do it all over again because I learned so much in that program. And I think it equipped me well for acting.
Yeah.
It equips one well for just about anything, actually. But I did a lot of acting. Actually, my high school had a great acting course of study that you had to go through in order to get into the theater company. And I went through all that. I performed a lot in high school, continued through college, just knowing that I still wanted to be an actor.
Yeah.
But when I was a junior, I studied in London for a semester. And one of the little mini courses I could take there was on opera, and I thought everybody should know something about opera.
Yeah.
So I saw my first opera at ENO, English National Opera, and it was the English version of Così fan tutte, which is by Mozart. And I thought, I have to do that. So after a kind of a circuitous route, I went to Japan after I graduated from college to see more of the world, to gain some work experience, just to make some money so I could go to grad school. And then I went to grad school for opera. Performed for 25 plus years, then started branching out into musical theater, straight theater, then got into the world of audiobooks. So I've been around.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. Do you think, this may be a question for later really, but I'm going to ask you it now, but if that's okay. So do you think traveling around, like, you say that you mentioned going to London and you went to Japan, you here, there and everywhere. Do you think that did help you when performing, when having to, characterize or things like that? Do you think that do you think seeing those and experiencing those things from afar bled into later experiences of performance?
I would say most definitely. When you get outside of your comfort zone, the world you know really well, and you go out and see completely different cultures where people don't speak your language, you really what's so wonderful about that is that you really see the commonality in our humanity, and that makes the world so much more of a smaller place. And it makes you so much more connected with people who don't share any of your culture or share any of your shared experiences. But there's still something there that pulls us all together. And I think that human condition, which is a lot of what I studied in that program of liberal studies, that's what brings us together. And I think that helps inform a performance. It helps you at least lay a foundation for where to start when you start building a backstory or a character or that kind of thing. There's something common to all of us.
Do you think that relation to other people, to really getting into I guess it's not really yourself getting into the piece, whatever you're doing, if it's a piece of opera, if it's a musical theatre or an audiobook, getting into that script, do you think that's what brings you into performance? Is that why you enjoy it so much?
What makes me enjoy that so much. I think it is. I think it goes back to finding that story to tell in there. Whether it was in an opera or in an audiobook, that something that I can latch on to is what makes me kind of dive into that. And I think that's what makes me think that others somewhere else in the world or even next door to me, they can latch on to as well. I also, my father is Filipino and grew up in the Philippines and became a naturalized American citizen after World War II. And so I kind of had built in to my growing up exposure to another culture. And I think that also kind of informed my sort of curiosity about the world and wanting to get out and see more, do more. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I read that you performed all over the place, really, but the places that caught my eye were the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, Camden Fringe, Buxton. Those are some pretty special events, especially to those of us in the UK. How was that experience playing those Fringe Festivals?
I had the Camden Fringe, I didn't really feel like we were part of. I didn't feel like there was a festival going on. We performed in this theater attached to the hotel that we were actually staying in.
Yeah.
Really, really nice place. But the Edinburgh Fringe, there's nothing like that in the world. You've been, haven't you?
I've been not to the actual festival. I've been a week afterwards and seen some aftermath gigs. Okay. It's one of my. It's a real dream to go.
So, in all honesty, I don't think the production that I went to the Fringe with belonged there. And I'll explain that in a second. But the entire city. Well, I mean, the old part of the city is basically taken over by all these performers, and almost anything is turned into a performing venue. It could be a little cafe. It could be an alley between two buildings. It could be a big giant tent that has a purple cow on the outside. That's a performing venue. But as the word fringe would connote, things are very much on a shoestring budget. Mm-hmm. Things might be in the very infancy in development. A lot of these shows will become bigger shows after they kind of test things out at the Fringe. Well, I went with an opera company based here in Chicago, and the woman who started this company took Jane Austen's Persuasion, and she adapted it into a musical using the music that Jane Austen referred to in her journals, or actually wrote out some of in her journals. So there were no issues of copyright infringement. It's all public domain music. So anyway, our show was a full-blown, it was like a big operatic cast, mostly operatic singers, although it's a musical. We had a 10-piece orchestra. We had full period costumes, gorgeous wigs. Some of us, like me, I had more than one wig. So this was not a typical Fringe production. And we only did, like, a lot of Fringe shows will run for several weeks. We ran for 3 performances. But it was great to be part of it. Yeah. It was just a great experience.
I bet. What did you think of Edinburgh and being around Scotland?
I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved Scotland. We also performed in Aberdeen that year. We were in Aberdeen, nice. And then we were in Edinburgh, and then a couple years later, was it? We went back to Aberdeen, and then we went to Stirling and performed at the university there. Us Americans love coming over to England, to the UK, to see everything old, because old for us is 200 years old. For you guys, you're like that's nothing, and being able to see the castle was so much fun to explore, and the ghost tours, we love all that stuff, you know.
Yeah.
We when we were in Aberdeen, my travel mate and I, my roommate for the trip, she and I took a bus out to the estuary so we could go see the seals.
Oh, nice.
There are hundreds of seals out there, and had a great time doing that. We just, we really enjoyed our time in Scotland. Well, basically, we just love being in the UK. So
that's really nice to hear. We always say folks come in sort of middle England, in the kind of centre of it, and then we go up to Scotland quite a lot on holiday, and we always think that it always kind of looks pretty much the same as England, you know, all this sort of landscapes and things. And then as soon as you pass kind of St Andrews and you kind of go up to the Highlands, it's like another world. Like that is where, you know, Outlander, the TV show, kind of comes into it, and you're like, yeah, I love it.
Right, right. It is different. And someday I want, hopefully, I don't know if our show will ever go back, but I have got to get to Skye. I have to.
Oh yeah,
I have to get up there. Yeah,
it's amazing. I think this should be a travel show instead.
Let's talk about let's talk about places in the UK.
So moving on to audiobooks specifically. So with your performance background, your opera background and things, I can certainly see why audiobooks might have appealed to you. What is it about audiobooks as a medium that keeps you coming back to recording?
Well, this may be an answer that a lot of narrators say, is that, especially in fiction, I get to play all the parts. I can't tell you how many times I'll go to a show and I say, oh, I wish, he or she had done this or that with that character. They kind of missed that opportunity. Yeah. And then I get to go in the booth and do all the characters myself, and someone else can say I missed an opportunity on a character or something. But that's one of the wonderful things about audio, being a narrator for audiobooks, is that I get to explore inside all these characters' heads for a while, and live in their, walk in their shoes, and I love that. I love being able to do that.
Yeah, I bet. I know exactly from my own experience. That's definitely the part, one of the parts that I enjoy the most. When it comes to character voices, do you rely on a specific process for creating them? Can you tell us a little more about where you draw voices from, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I'm still kind of new in this compared to a lot of my colleagues, but I mean, the first place is, what did the author write, and what, especially if they're specific about a sound or an accent. But the other thing is, the character, his or herself, kind of pushes me in a certain direction. What kind of energy do they have? What kind of outlook do they have? Are they an outgoing person? Are they reserved? Are they a bundle of nerves? Do they have a commanding presence and feeling? A lot of that is what kind of informs how I approach the character voice. But another thing I'm starting to do a little bit more of is getting out of the booth and physicalizing the character, so that I can sort of put that imprint in my brain of how that person carries themselves, because I've noticed in my travels, I sound like some I am old, but a seasoned traveler. When you study another language, for example, Japanese, you'll see that there's a lot of physicality that goes into how that person speaks their language. So a Japanese person is not going to just sit with their legs spread apart and shoulders broad and talk to you. Especially a woman, would never be like that. There's a lot more of this pulling in physically of themselves. And there's a lot of very sort of, I don't want to allow my personality to kind of jump out at you. So there's a lot of this pulling back kind of feeling, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, and then if you talk to somebody who's Italian, you know, there's a whole different physicality happening. So I think that happens a lot just within our own culture. You can see how people's the way they handle themselves, their deportment informs their voices in some ways too. So that's why I'm trying to get out of the booth a little bit more and add movement. You know, how does this guy walk? How does this guy sit? What would this guy, you know, how does this guy drive? You know, if there's driving in the book, that kind of thing. So
it's so interesting that you say that. I've never really thought about it, you know, with the different, you know, the kind of cultures affect, like the people, the body positions, and affects the kind of the language. Really, have you always been kind of interested in language
you know, I think I have. You know what I think it goes back to? I have to thank my father for that. But so the name I grew up with, my last name, was Janairo, and it's spelled Janairo. No one could ever pronounce it. No one. It's definitely a Filipino name, because I don't know that it looks a lot like Janeiro, like Rio de Janeiro, or Rio de Janeiro, but anyway, it's not spelled the same. And I think there's a lot of Filipino or Portuguese influence in that name. There were a lot of explorers and settlers in the Philippines from Europe. But I think because I had to explain so many times my last name to people, to how to pronounce it correctly, explain that it's Filipino, I became a lot more sensitive to other people's names and being able to pronounce them correctly. Yeah. And in that, I started having to learn, you know, maybe nuances of Polish or German, or, you know, names that would Russian, you know, names that would be a little bit more challenging for, you know, regular old American from the Midwest. So I think that might be where I kind of got an interest in that. You know, in opera too, you have to study multiple languages. The romantic, well, most of the romantics, like Italian, of course, French, Latin, and then German is a very commonly sung language. And you need to be able to know how to analyze the text and be able to pronounce it. You should be pretty good at speaking it. I am not good at speaking German, and I'm not great at Italian, but French I can kind of get away with. Japanese I can speak, but anyway, I think being exposed to all those languages too kind of gave me an interest in accents. Yeah, you know, understanding sounds. I love the International Phonetic Alphabet. Not every narrator is into the IPA, but it's a great tool. It's great. It's just because there's no question about if the symbol is a certain sound, and that's what it is. That symbol is always that sound. Yeah. If you say to a native speaker of English, can you write out phonetically, you know, however is comfortable for you, like, you know, like some of the names that we were dealing with, like the I'm trying to remember in one last book, like you didn't have to do it. I can't remember.
I know what you mean. I can't remember what it was, but I struggled spelling it out.
Yeah, well, for example, even Natalia. Yeah. Natalia, I wanted to make sure she wanted to pronounce Natalia, but this happens a lot when I ask authors. They don't know IPA. There's one author I've worked with who does know IPA. I love her, but I don't dislike the other authors. But the authors will often just kind of, you know, as they with their brain understands, they would write it out that way, with no indication of which syllable is stressed. Yeah. So that's always a problem. But if you had the IPA at your disposal, there's no question about what the sound is, you know. Yeah. So anyway.
I think that's a good tip. I never just going back to the about having to understand. Obviously, you understand languages if you're singing. If it's in a piece of opera, understanding the language, understanding the words, and understanding putting that meaning in. There must be a lot of research that has to go into it.
There's a lot of prep.
Yeah.
It's funny now that I think about it. There's a lot of prep before you should get up and start singing in these languages. If you don't know what you're singing, you should not be singing it. So it's kind of the same way with audiobooks. I mean, if you've not read that book, and you've not done the research required, you should not be recording that book,
Yeah, 100%. Well, that brings me on to the idea of pre-production. So whenever we get the pleasure of having a narrator onto the show, the majority of questions I get asked to ask the guest is actually about pre-production, prepping the script, logging character voices, etc. Can you walk us through your process of pre-production?
Well, okay, I'm starting another process right now. And I just got the script, and I like to use Notability. I know a lot of narrators use iAnnotate, which is an app that you can mark up a script with. And I'm not comfortable with that, so I use Notability, which is like iAnnotate. But I like my script in a PDF form. So the way this script was delivered to me came like the iBooks. It looks like it was an EPUB, a .EPUB thing. Yeah, which, I mean, I could use, and then it also came as, I don't even know what the other format was, but when I have to give it to a proofer and we can't talk about the same page number, and it's a problem. So that's the first thing. I need a PDF. And then I always sit down with the book and I read it. And what I'm reading for is enjoyment, for what the impact the book will have on me. Okay. What kind of overall tone and message, feeling is in the book. But I'm still working because I'm also jotting down all the characters that I'm going to need to pay attention to, jotting down or marking up words I don't know or I need to double check, place names especially, that kind of thing. Once I finish that, then I go back, look up stuff, try to... Also, I like to involve, if I can, because you can't always do this, involve the author. And say, hey, author, so we've got, these are a lot of the main characters. Can you share with me your idea? If you were going to cast this person in a movie, who would be your ideal cast for these different characters? Yeah. And that's not so much for me to become an impersonator of a famous actor for that character. That's more for me to gather a sense of character rather than, I'll be Brad Pitt for this guy and Jennifer Aniston for that woman. And no, it doesn't work that way. And then I also like to find out if there's a series, what characters are going to come back? What characters I have to make sure that I can do a sustainable voice for. Right? Because it hasn't happened yet to me, but I've heard horror stories about narrators who have this really voice like this for a minor character who just showed up and bought some cigarettes and left. And then in the next book, they're the main character. And
you can't as well.
You cannot sustain that voice. So I ask those kinds of things. So in prep, sometimes I like to, if I can, involve the author. Sometimes you can't. So then you're kind of you have carte blanche, I guess, basically, to just explore different characters. But that's kind of.
There's a lot of helpful tips there. That I would really suggest to anyone listening to consider if you're not already taking those on. Now, I've had the pleasure of working on a few dual narration projects with you, and I wanted to again come back to the pre-production side of things. When working with another narrator, such as myself, who's on the other side of the pond, can you explain the process of prepping the script? what you need from the other narrator, what you send them, etc. Because I think it can be daunting for narrators who have perhaps only worked solo before. So when someone else comes on board and stuff, kind of what can you just talk us through your process of and also how to be a good? You can teach me how to be a better dual narrator, other narrator.
Well, I don't know that I can teach you much, John, because you're my only partner so far. but no, I think I've learned in our process though of going through part of if I'm prepping a book and I know I have a partner, I need to find those places in my partner's text that overlap with mine. So I have to read the whole book. I mean, you have to read the whole book anyway.
Yeah.
But for example, maybe there's a name, we had a discussion about this. Maybe there's a name that I say that my partner is also going to mention in his or her text. We have to make sure that we're pronouncing these things the same way. Yeah. We need to see how we're approaching characters. Like, for example, a book we just did. There are some characters that I voice that you never ever touch. And then there are characters that I voice that you are very important in your voice. So in that case, we've got to kind of be on the same page.
Yeah,
and I think it's important to share. I think not only the actual, like, what your approach. You could record what your approach to a certain voice is and share it with me, or I can do vice versa. But it's also important to kind of share your take on the character, because that, more than anything, is what informs how that voice speaks, how you deliver the dialogue. And especially, I want to try exploring this more later on in my career, but I'd like to be able to do sort of the Scott Brick approach to voices, where he doesn't actually have a voice for the different characters. It's all an intent. It's all, he doesn't really change his voice. He may soften his voice a little bit more for a woman's voice. But anyway, that what that speaks to is the ability to be able to create a character completely based on that the characterization, rather than relying on just the voice. So that is always part of developing a character, in addition to maybe making a character that has more back placement or forward placement, or more nasality, or a lisp, or those kinds of things. Yeah. But I think it's good to have a discussion about who these people are with your partner.
Yeah, I find that the whole thing really fascinating, especially what you're saying about Scott Brick and his approach to it. It just sort of shows that it's art at the end of it, isn't it? There's no one way to go about it. It's all there's so many different avenues to go down. Speaking of Scott Brick, does Scott Brick do coaching? I think he does, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Yeah. So speaking of coaching, if I can link this, I saw that you recently attended Sean Pratt and Johnny Heller's weekend workshop. Is that right?
I did.
Yeah. Their names, as I'm sure you can imagine, have popped up on this podcast a lot as inspirations and great coaches, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience attending one of those events?
Well, I can tell you about Sean Pratt's 14 session course of nonfiction study. I started that January of 2021. And it's a great analysis of how to do audiobook narration for nonfiction, but Sean also gives you all kinds of business insight, how to figure out your brand, how to market your brand, how to manipulate social media, how to build your brand. I don't know how to find your brand. This kind of thing. And I think it's a great thing for narrators to look into, even if you think you're only going to be doing fiction, because the things you learn in his nonfiction course of study are completely applicable in fiction. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And I always felt like if you don't work hard for something, then it probably wasn't really worth it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, but about this workshop this past weekend, that was Sean Pratt and Johnny Heller. Johnny grew up in the Chicago area, so it was like coming home for him.
Oh, nice.
They have very, very different approaches to coaching, and they even characterized it as Johnny is tactical and Sean is more strategic. Okay. Johnny gets right in there with you, and he kind of, as you're, reading, he'll come right in and he'll say, no, stop, go back, do this, try to work this out, think of this, he's like molding you, helping you as you're going through it. Sean's approach is a little different than that. Mm-hmm. And it's nice that you have the two of them in a workshop together, because they really complement each other. Yeah. There's a lot of great insight from them on all sorts of things. I did not attend Sean's. So there were 2 days. First day was fiction, and the second day was nonfiction. And because I just graduated from the Ginger Yoda dojo, Sean even said, "Don't come on Sunday. Just come back to socialize with us," which is what I did. Yeah. But there's a lot to there's a lot of acting involved in nonfiction reading, and a lot of people don't realize that. Mm-hmm. But you basically are the voice of that author, and sometimes it's almost like you're giving the TED Talk, and you need to have that perspective. So you're using your acting chops all the time in nonfiction. And when people tell you, oh yeah, AI, they could just do all the nonfiction stuff. No, I disagree completely. They can't. AI cannot do it. There's a lot in studying with Sean too. You find there's a lot of nuance. There's irony. There's sarcasm. There's humor in nonfiction writing. And who's going to pick that up? But humans, right? Yeah. Humans are going to pick that up. Humans are going to be able to put it into the recording. But Sean gives you a lot of great tools for analysis, for understanding the different voices you have to use. I don't mean like character voices, but the different kinds of approaches. Like, am I speaking now as like a teacher, or am I now doing more of an anecdote, or is this part just presentational? Like, chapter 1. This is the exploration of pi r squared. Whatever. There are you have to be able to find those voices. No.
That's super, super interesting. I'm so eager to join one of those workshops myself. I've been sort of seeing pictures of many of my narrator friends, sort of joining them over the last few months, and now that we're out of COVID a little bit, and I've just been getting so much envy. I was saying to Tom Jordan, who went to one a few years ago. He went to one when they've just sort of started setting up, and they were talking about coming over to the UK. And I was like, oh, please.
Sean is over at the UK every couple of months, right?
Yeah.
Because his lady friend lives in, I guess, kind of in the Cotswolds area, or I don't know, somewhere near Bath. But he's got to do something in the UK,
I think I had his lady friend on the podcast last week.
I love Anna.
It was a really, really great. That's out on Friday, by the way, viewers.
Okay. I'll listen.
Thank you. But yeah, I just I keep saying, oh God, I want to go to one. I want to do because it's part of the community aspect of it. Because audiobook narration can be a really lonely job in some respects. You can spend hours on end without any human contact or even leaving the cold dark booth, or at least that's my experience. How important is it for narrators to reach out and join a fellow narrator community?
Oh, it's super important. Oh my goodness, I can't tell you. So when I started, I kind of gave you a big giant background of my performing life, but I didn't really say that when I first started in audiobook narration. Let's back up a little bit. I listened to a lot of audiobooks, and it took me, I don't know why I was so dim about this, but it took me a while to realize, oh my gosh, they're all actors. Almost all of them. Yeah. They're actors. I'm like, why am I not doing this? So, not knowing how to get into that, I'm like, well, it's part of the voiceover industry, I think. And there's an acting school. There's a couple of acting schools in Chicago, but this one I went to, they had an VO level 1 course. So I took that class thinking maybe they'll explore audiobooks. Well, they didn't. The instructor's like, I don't really know anything about audiobooks. So she was honest about that. But about a month after the course finished, she contacted me and said, hey, there's an actor friend of mine, and I didn't know this, but now I do, who teaches how to get started on ACX class. So I took that class. And it was good. He got me started, but he was also very much like, this is how I'm doing it is how you need to do it. So follow everything I'm doing, and that's how it's done. So from book 1, I'm thinking I did it just how he was telling me, the technical aspects of recording. Yeah. I did exactly what he said. So I was recording in stereo, and I couldn't figure out how to make it mono. And his were all in stereo too. And then he would take it from like GarageBand, recorded it in GarageBand, and then we'd go over to Audacity to edit. And so after I did this for a couple of books, I'm like, well, first of all, I don't like that. Why am I using two Audacity? I can record in Audacity. Why don't I just record there? So then I started doing that. And then I started thinking, I don't like how I'm reading. I don't like how I'm doing these books. I don't like my narration technique. I had no idea there was a whole world of coaches out there. So I started as this is how it happened. I started looking at different DAWs, digital audio workstations for the non audiobook narrator community. And as I started looking at DAWs, I started looking at people saying, well, so-and-so uses this and so-and-so likes that. And like, who are these people? And I started looking at who these people were. And I realized I think the first name I came across was Pat Fraley, who's a big narration coach. I have not coached with him. And he often pairs up with Scott Brick to do coachings. And I just started realizing and poking into more places on the internet, like there are coaches out here, people who can help me. And I had no idea. I mean, I got plopped like right in the middle of this audiobook narration world. And then eventually the blinders started to come off and I'm like, oh my gosh. So, and there's so much, with community, so going back to your question, there's such a wealth of information available from other people's experience, or they can point you in the direction of other people who can help in all different aspects too, technical, recording, processing, post-production aspects, to actually how to make the text come alive. Yeah. So, and then there's a little Facebook group in Chicago of narrators that I found. Sean Pratt was the one. He's like, you got to find that. You got to get on that little group. And it's been a great resource because I've had questions pop up that they've been so good about and patient about answering. And if you're by yourself in your booth all the time, you're not going to become a better narrator by yourself.
Yeah.
It takes other ears to help you along in that journey. And we all want to be better. We want to be, right, the best we can be. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I do think...
I couldn't agree more. I think the community is such an important aspect of it. And it's really nice as well, because I think narrating an audiobook is quite a unique challenge to take on. And I don't think that folks who have never narrated an audiobook quite understand the amount of work, the amount of effort that one has to put into the craft. So I think that meeting with, like-minded people and people who've done that before, just on a human level, can be quite nourishing. Not to mention all of the advice and all of the, everything that being a part of that community can bring you.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So just before, because we've been doing this for.
That went quick. Yeah.
Before we run out of time, have you any projects coming up in the future that you're excited for that you can perhaps tell us about?
Well, it's this next book I'm prepping. I'm a little scared of it because I narrated 5 books for these authors. It's a man and woman who I think the books, at least I know the one that I narrated was originally a screenplay.
Yeah. And
then they put it into novel form. So it's dialogue heavy. I mean, really dialogue heavy. And it has over 100, it had, that last one, over 120 characters. And it took place in Jamaica in 1689. So it's all about pirates.
Wow.
And all these people from all over the world, explorers and pirates, and then there's like the British government officials, and then there's French government officials, and then there's Germans and Dutch and the Spaniards, and then there's a few Americans who ended up down in this area. So that's what I'm getting ready to prep, is another book of that sort of series.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for that challenge, but I'm also scared.
My gosh, yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's also like a great. It's really great to get some accents down as well, some new ones. If it's quite a well-traveled book, I guess.
If they're good, yeah, it's great. If they're not, I don't ask me to. I hope there's no Russians. I hope there are no Russians in this book.
Yeah.
But
the best of luck with it.
Thanks. But you know what? I wanted to offer a piece of advice. I just thought this might be a good place to do that.
Sure.
I don't know if there's going to be a lot of narrators listening. I hope they are.
Most of them.
but here's something that I wanted to share. I've heard a lot of this happening when I go into like Clubhouse, or even watching people when we have Zoom chats. Mm-hmm. Someone, like, before a narrator gets ready to start reading, they like to do something that is really not good for your vocal cords. And they like to do this really violent throat clearing. They like to go, and I just like to say now it's going to bother me because I shouldn't have done that. But I'd like to say that you should not ever, ever do that. Ever. Because your vocal cords are so tiny and delicate. And when you slam them together like that really, really hard, you're irritating them. And when you irritate them, they're going to create a protective layer of mucus, which is what you're trying to get rid of in the first place.
Yeah.
And the best way to... I learned this in grad school for opera, because, opera singers, they're very, very, very protective of the voce. There is a gentle way to clear the throat, but it's not satisfying. I will say that right now. But what you do is as you swallow, you have to swallow, and as you swallow, you kind of do a very gentle. I don't know if you can hear that, but I'm just kind of letting a puff of air go through, and I'm kind of gently closing the cords a little bit as you swallow. Add some water. Yeah. Be very gentle. But as soon as you start doing that really violent throat clearing, you're going to start the whole process. of irritating the cords,
Yeah.
and then having to clear them again because you're going to have more mucus. And I think one of the things to analyze about yourself is if you find that you've got a lot of gunk there, and when you're in the booth, watch yourself when you're outside the booth and see what you do in the normal course of the day. Because I bet 10 to 1 that you're just doing this violent throat clearing when you're outside the booth as well. So if you can get yourself in the habit of gentle throat clearing all of the time, will mean that you won't have this buildup of mucus once you get into the booth. In addition to staying hydrated, in addition to not having too much caffeine or alcohol, but or smoking. But I just wanted to say that because I've heard so many of my colleagues just get ready to read and they go, like, no, don't do that.
I've never heard that before, and it makes so much sense. Thank you very much. I think that will help a lot of people.
Well, look, that's where those little tiny pieces of tissue, that's how we make our money.
Yeah.
And
no,
if they're not healthy, you're screwed, right? So
absolutely,
we've got to take care of them. Yeah. So be a gentle throat clearer. How's that?
I think that's perfect. I think it's a perfect way to end. That just about does it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining us. All of the relevant links to social media accounts, websites, etc., can be found in the show notes. Thank you so much.